Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Hauntra. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any exciting coming up videos. The van hummed along the winding road, carrying 5 eager adventurers: Claire, Mark, Emily, Jake, and Chris. This trip to the Appalachian Mountains was meant to be an escape from their monotonous routines. As the majestic peaks came into view, Claire teased, "You know, they say hikers disappear up here all the time. Ghosts, cryptids. Take your pick." Jake snorted. "Please, it's a forest, not some cursed amusement park." Mark, their self-proclaimed leader and seasoned hiker, reassured them, "Stick to the path and we'll be fine." Still, Emily, always cautious, double-checked her supplies. The mood was light as Chris cracked jokes, but Claire couldn't ignore the heavy clouds gathering in the distance. As they pulled up to the trailhead, the radio cut out, replaced by static. Ignoring the unease creeping in, they grabbed their gear ready to embark on their adventure. The trailhead greeted them with a canopy of green, sunlight filtering through the trees. The forest seemed alive, the air fresh and invigorating. About a mile in, Chris paused, his attention caught by carvings on a nearby tree. Interlocking triangles, sharp and deliberate, scarred the bark. "Looks like someone had a bad day with a knife," Chris joked, tracing the lines. Mark dismissed it as graffiti, but Emily lingered, her gaze fixed on the fresh cuts. Jake snapped a picture, laughing about adding it to his weird things collection. They pressed on, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them. An hour into the hike, they stumbled upon a strange shrine. Rocks, feathers, and bones were carefully arranged in the middle of the trail. "Creepy," Claire muttered, while Chris knelt to inspect it. "Witchcraft vibes," he joked, pretending to chant over the shrine. Jake, unimpressed, accidentally kicked a stone, causing the structure to collapse. Immediately, a gust of wind swirled through the trees, unnaturally cold and sharp. Emily recoiled, her instincts screaming danger. "We shouldn't mess with it," she whispered, stepping back. Mark agreed, urging them forward, but the group couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere that seemed to cling to them. By late afternoon, the group stumbled upon a derelict log cabin hidden among the trees. Its roof sagged, and its shattered windows stared back like empty eye sockets. "Creepy or cool?" Chris asked, snapping a photo. Claire peered inside, finding only rotting wood and broken furniture. Jake suggested they camp nearby, but Emily vehemently objected. "This place feels wrong," she said, her voice trembling. They decided to move further up the trail. As they left, faint whispers seemed to drift from the cabin, though Jake dismissed it as the wind. Claire glanced back once, catching a glimpse of movement inside, a shadow that didn't belong to any of them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they set up camp in a clearing. The flickering campfire cast long shadows on the surrounding trees. Claire tried to lighten the mood with ghost stories, but the strange noises in the forest, cracks, snaps, and faint whispers, kept everyone on edge. Emily noticed footprints circling their tents, far larger than any of theirs. She woke Mark, who examined them under the dim flashlight. "It's probably a bear," he said, though his tone was uncertain. They decided to take turns keeping watch, but the forest felt alive, its unseen presence gnawing at their nerves. The night grew colder, the forest eerily silent except for the crackle of the campfire. Chris took the first watch, sitting with a flashlight in hand. Around midnight, he heard faint footsteps, deliberate and slow, just beyond the clearing. He called out, "Hello, anyone there?" but received no response. Mark joined him, and together they scanned the forest, their flashlights catching glimpses of shifting shadows. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night from deep within the woods. Everyone bolted out of their tents, panic spreading through the group. It sounded human, Claire cried, clutching her flashlight. Despite Mark's insistence that they stay put, Chris grabbed a stick and ventured toward the sound. He returned minutes later, pale and trembling. "There's nothing out there, but something's watching us," he whispered. At dawn, the group decided to break camp and leave the forest early. But as they backtracked, the trail they had followed the previous day seemed to vanish. The carved tree from earlier was nowhere in sight. "This can't be right," Mark said, consulting his map. Emily felt the hairs on her neck stand up. "We're lost, aren't we?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake tried to reassure everyone, but the unease was palpable. They pressed on, hoping to find a recognizable landmark, but the forest seemed to twist and shift around them. Every turn brought them deeper into an unfamiliar landscape, the trees growing denser and darker. As the group wandered, they stumbled upon a narrow river. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the surrounding trees like a mirror. Claire knelt to fill her bottle but froze. Faint whispers rose from the water, unintelligible yet hypnotic. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Mark pulled her back, warning her not to touch the water. Chris, skeptical, tossed a rock into the river, breaking the surface. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural growl emanating from somewhere nearby. The group hurriedly moved away, the sound following them like an unseen predator. Hours later, they came upon another shrine, larger and more intricate than the first. This one was adorned with human-like effigies made of twigs and vines. Emily recoiled, covering her mouth. "This isn't normal," she whispered. Mark inspected it cautiously, noting the strange symbols etched into the surrounding trees. Chris, despite the fear, snapped a picture. "Why are these here?" "Who made them?" he muttered. Suddenly, a gust of wind knocked one effigy to the ground. The forest seemed to hold its breath as a deep, resonant hum vibrated through the air. "We need to leave. Now," Emily urged, tears in her eyes. As dusk approached, the group became aware of something following them. Twigs snapped in the distance, and shadows flickered just beyond their vision. Mark stopped abruptly, motioning for silence. The forest fell deathly quiet. Then came the sound, labored breathing, heavy and unnatural, growing closer. Jake turned, his flashlight catching a glimpse of glowing eyes before the figure vanished. Claire screamed, clutching Mark's arm. "It's just an animal," Jake stammered, though he didn't believe it himself. The group quickened their pace, their fear palpable as the presence stalked them relentlessly. The group stumbled into a small clearing as night fell, desperate for rest. The moonlight revealed strange symbols burned into the ground, forming a large circle. "We shouldn't stay here," Emily warned, her voice shaking. "We don't have a choice," Mark countered. "It's too dangerous to keep moving in the dark." They set up a makeshift camp, their flashlights flickering ominously. As they huddled together, the symbols seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Claire tried to sleep but woke with a start, gasping for air. "Something's inside the circle," she whispered, pointing at the darkness. The others saw nothing, but the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger. By morning, half their gear was missing. Backpacks, food supplies, and Mark's compass had vanished without a trace. "This isn't possible," Jake muttered, frantically searching. "We didn't hear anything." Claire found claw marks on a nearby tree, deep and jagged, as though carved by something massive. "Whatever's out there, it was here last night," she said, her voice trembling. Mark tried to rally the group, insisting they focus on finding the way out. But with dwindling supplies and frayed nerves, tensions flared. "This is your fault," Chris snapped at Mark, his fear turning into anger. The group trudged on, their unity unraveling with every step. Deep in the forest, they found an ancient stone altar covered in moss and strange carvings. The air around it felt heavy, suffocating. Emily refused to go near it, while Jake, curious, traced the carvings with his fingers. A sudden, sharp cry echoed through the trees, making him jump back. Mark examined the altar, noticing dried, dark stains on its surface. "Let's move. Now," he ordered, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. As they left, the carvings seemed to shift, almost as if following their movements. The oppressive silence of the forest grew louder, making every step feel like a march toward doom. The trail abruptly split into two, neither path marked or familiar. "Which way do we go?" Claire asked, panic creeping into her voice. Mark tried to use the map, but the landscape didn't match any of the routes. Chris suggested splitting up, but Emily vehemently opposed it. "Splitting up is how people die in horror movies," she argued, tears brimming in her eyes. A low growl came from the forest, silencing their argument. Without a word, Mark chose the left path, and the others followed, their fear palpable. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting unnaturally. As they trudged along the narrow path, Chris suddenly stopped. "Where's Jake?" he asked, looking around. The group froze, realizing Jake was no longer with them. "He was right behind us," Claire cried, her voice cracking. They called out for him, their shouts echoing eerily through the forest. No response came, only the rustling of leaves. Mark insisted they keep moving, fearing whatever had taken Jake would come for the rest of them. Claire sobbed as they continued, each of them glancing nervously over their shoulders. The path led to a shallow stream, its water black and murky. Claire knelt to drink but hesitated as her reflection distorted unnaturally. "Don't touch it," Emily warned, pulling her back. As they crossed the stream, whispers filled the air, growing louder with each step. Mark stopped midstream, his eyes wide as a hand-like shadow reached up from the water, grasping at his leg. He yanked free, stumbling onto the bank. "This place isn't natural," he gasped, his fear now visible to everyone. The sun began to set again, but this time the forest seemed to grow darker, unnaturally fast. Their flashlights flickered, the batteries inexplicably draining. Emily clung to Claire, her fear almost paralyzing her. Mark led the way, but his steps faltered as the path disappeared entirely, leaving them surrounded by endless trees. "We're walking in circles," Claire whispered, panic rising. The forest grew colder, their breath visible in the icy air. Every rustle in the trees felt like a predator waiting to strike. As they stumbled deeper into the forest, the oppressive silence was broken by an eerie, childlike laughter. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing between the trees. Emily froze, gripping Claire's arm tightly. "That's not real," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her disbelief. Chris spun around, shining his flickering flashlight into the darkness. The laughter grew louder, more distorted, blending into low growls. "We need to keep moving," Mark shouted, trying to keep the group together. But then they saw it. Small figures darting between the trees, too quick to make out clearly. Claire screamed as one of the figures rushed toward them, only to vanish inches from her face. Terrified, they broke into a run, the laughter following them like an echo they couldn't escape. "This isn't a forest," Chris gasped, barely able to breathe. "It's a trap." They finally collapsed in a clearing, exhausted and trembling, the laughter still faint in the distance. The clearing where they stopped to catch their breath stretched unnaturally wide, its perimeter hidden in mist. Despite their exhaustion, an overwhelming sense of dread settled over them. "Why can't we see the edge?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible. The mist seemed alive, shifting and curling around them. Mark tried to check the map again, but the paper crumbled in his hands as if aged 100 years. "We're trapped," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. Chris pointed toward the center of the clearing, where the mist parted to reveal a figure. It was Jake, or at least something wearing his face. His expression was blank, his movements jerky like a puppet on strings. "Jake?" Claire called out, but Mark grabbed her arm. "That's not him," he warned. The figure smiled, its teeth unnaturally sharp, and began walking toward them. As the figure approached, the group backed away, their fear mounting with every step. The Jake-like creature raised its hand, and the mist swirled violently, obscuring their view. Suddenly, the laughter returned, deafening and disorienting. Claire screamed, clutching her ears, as the ground beneath her feet gave way. Mark grabbed her, but the mist pulled her from his grasp. "Claire!" he shouted, his voice lost in the cacophony. One by one, the mist swallowed them. Emily's cries faded, Chris's flashlight blinked out, and Mark felt himself being dragged into the void. The last thing he saw was the Jake-like figure smiling as if it had won. When the forest finally fell silent, there was no trace of the hikers. No footprints, no gear, not even the remains of their campsite. The mist dissipated, revealing the trailhead as though nothing had happened. Days later, their abandoned van was found, keys still in the ignition, but the 5 friends were never seen again. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.